in very soon. So for those of you who are here, welcome and thank you for joining us on our roundtable event this morning. Today we've got Simon Bayntun, who is an interim CTO, CIO, 25 plus years experience. Simon, I'm sort of.
I'm going to give you age away now. I started it wasn't called IT in 1979, but that was when I first encountered an IBM 360, an assembler.
Wow. Okay.
It was a couple of years back. I've still got my hair though, so I'm not doing too bad.
You do. Listen, you're doing better than me and Lionel and Roddy. And you, oh God, well, you're outnumbered, Simon, by borders. So listen, I really appreciate you taking the time out to do this presentation. And it's a bit of a different one today. Obviously, there's a tech angle to this, as of all of our roundtable events. But today we're talking about retaining key people. And your background with IBM, HP, and then more recently as a consultant, you've spent a lot of time in the rail industry. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, I think, I'd say more it's using examples from the transport sector where I've been doing a lot of work recently, and not just in the UK. I've recently been doing some consultancy for Westpac, which is Canadian Rail, and Indian Rail as they embark on their digital journey. But it's applicable across industry basically, and it's just from experience I've picked up over the last 20 years.
Yeah, and I think what, as you say, even though we're going to be talking about the rail industry, a lot of what we're going to be discussing can be applied to any organisation. So I'm looking forward to this one. I'm just setting up the presentation. Do you want me to? I think we sort of earlier on we tried to do the old sharey where you had control. Are you okay with that still, Simon?
Yeah, if I can get control again, yeah.
Yeah, of course I can. Just bear with me 1 second. So everybody should be able to see my screen now. And great stuff. Simon, I'm going to approve that. So you've got control. Take it away, and we'll all, the rest of us will mute ourselves. And when people do arrive, if you see me take control of the mouse, Simon, it's just I'm letting other people into the meeting. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. Okay, so just to we've gone one too far. You need to go back. There you go. So just very briefly, so what Sam was saying about retaining people. This is about this is really my thoughts about attracting and retaining key people in an industry, and you'll see why I say industry as I go through this. So the background to this is that. There we go. We've got one forward. There you go. So I spent some time working at Barclays Bank, and it's pertinent to this discussion. Actually, I went into Barclays Bank not because I had any experience in financial services, because actually I had no experience in financial services whatsoever. My background was at the time mainly in logistics and retail, and the CEO of Barclays Direct Channels recruited me specifically because I had no skills in banking. And they wanted to be able to change the way they did a lot of processing. And one of the things I tackled was the mortgage process, which currently, when I joined, well, the time I joined Barclays, took 18 weeks to underwrite a mortgage. And they said, why does it take 18 weeks? And if you talk to financial services people, they said, because it did. And I said, well, explain it to me, because I don't know anything about banking. And we actually got it down to 18 hours. And the following year, we got it down to an instant decision. And that was applying technology. You know, it was simply applying technology to the process in a new way that hadn't been thought about because it was banking, and that kind of got me thinking at the time about how do you exploit the talent that you have within an organisation? How do you build the best teams? How do you get the best ideas out of people? And it went on to be an industry thing. So. I spent some time with EDS, I spent some time with HP, spent quite a lot of time with IBM, which was the last kind of proper job I had. and I was the cognitive lead for Europe for travel and transport. So dealing with Watson, primarily big data analytics, in people like Lufthansa, Hapag-Lloyd, Maersk, UK Rail, German Railways, Swiss Railways. So a whole bunch of clients are looked after and using AI and digital, and working a lot with the workforces within those organisations. I also then got, because I've got a bit of a financial services background, got dragged in to do some stuff from RBS. And that's where this whole thing came from. So basically, what I'm going to talk about is the talent crisis we have in UK industry. You don't have to spend much time on Google to find that there's a massive skill shortage in the country. What most people then do is say, well, why have we got all these people unemployed after COVID-19 if we've got this massive skill shortage? And that's one of the things I want to talk about. And the fact that that means we need a new industry approach. We need to empower the workforce and create a vision for them, and that's really important. And we need to start a lot younger than we do. And hopefully you put my nice picture back in there for your Manchester lad. Yeah, good. So, there you go, it does work. So, as I said, the skill shortage, we've got a disconnect between supply and demand in the skills economy. This isn't just a UK problem, this is a global problem. But yeah, global's too big, so let's look at the UK. According to the Department for Trade in 2018, the last year for which full figures are available, the skill shortage cost UK business £4.4 billion, which is quite a big opportunity cost. And that's the direct cost of not being able to attract the right skill into companies to enable them to fulfill contracts, to do jobs, to execute projects, a whole range of things. It does not include the social cost of people who could be employed being unemployed. And that, that's more than 4.4 billion, that's even more, but that's a 4.4 billion pound, that's a 4.4 billion hole in the corporate balance sheets in the UK. I've given a couple of examples there. So the rail sector, middle of last year, they published the sector plan for rail, which was a business government joint venture, and published big fanfare, and it said the cost of the skills deficit in rail currently is £206 million per year, and that excludes HS2. And HS2 are going to need another 10,000 qualified engineers by 2025. If I told you that we were at minus 2,500 qualified engineers at the moment in the UK, if you look at the number of people who are deemed to be qualified engineers against the number of job vacancies, you'll see that adding another 10,000 that causes a bit of a hole. The UK film industry is another industry that's growing. They need 10,000 people over the next 5 years to be able to just fulfill current commitments to Hollywood and other film companies. So what we need to do is basically try and find people to fill those gaps, and that's the challenge. And we need people that understand the world of work. We often hear about the future of work, and the future of work more or less pertains to what some pointy pencil heads in Accenture and companies like that and EY. I'll sit there and contemplate and say, oh, in the future we'll all be doing jobs that didn't exist when we were at school. And I don't know if anybody of you are doing a job that existed when you were at school, but I'm not. I don't think Sam is. And I'm certainly not doing a job that I envisage being in. We're all supposed to be living in the moon and flying around on jetpacks by 2020, according to the comics I read when I was 12. So yeah, it's that world of work. It's not just about the future of work. It's wider than that. There you go. Right. I think we only want one there. And the whole thing around careers is changing. In today's world of work, there's no more gold watches. One of my ex-colleagues from IBM, my old boss, good friend of mine, he's just retiring after 41 years with IBM. I can almost guarantee that in 40 years' time, there won't be anybody in IBM that's been there 40 years. It's a completely different world. A lot of industries have now specialized where you've got lots of players with core skills. So you no longer have, if you take, we're using rail as an example. It's an extreme example because we used to have British Rail. We then split it up into what was supposed to be 4 constituent parts. The government then realised there was a whole bunch of parts that weren't covered by those 4 constituent parts. So you've now got a whole organisation which just specialises in rail safety. They don't do anything else. They just do rail safety. You've got other companies who refit Wi-Fi systems on rail, and they're qualified to do that. They don't do anything else. I know another company who just trains train drivers in simulators. They don't do anything else. So you don't have end-to-end career structures within a single company anymore. So if you are working for a train operating company, for example, and you want to get into dispatch management as your next step up in the career, that doesn't exist within the franchise organisation which you're in. That sits in someone like Amy. And then as you get a bit more up and you want to manage rolling stock procurement, let's say, well, that doesn't exist within Amy. That exists within Orosco, and they're basically banks. And then if you go up from there and you want to get into designing equipment for the railways, then you've got to go and work for Hitachi. So, whereas 25 years ago, you'd have joined British Rail and you'd have gone through that whole career progression. And in fact, they had a few CEOs that literally started as people that worked in the catering car, as stewards on the railways, and worked their way up to sort of like chief exec of British Rail. You can't do that anymore. And the other thing that's coming, society now values flexibility. We all want flexibility in our work. The idea that you go to work at 9 o'clock and you come home at 5 o'clock and you do that 5 days a week forever, and those rigid work patterns, they're no longer there. The whole, if you look at the change that's coming, the whole gig economy is here to stay. People are used to being able to work hours when they want. You hear a lot of negativity about the gig economy, but my daughter is 20 and she's part of that gig economy, and so are her friends, and they value the fact that they can work when they want, and if they don't want to work, they just turn the phones off. You've got the concept of hybrid careers and agile careers, which is something I've been working on with a few companies, about the fact that you might have a career with more than one leg. You've got agile careers where in an agile career, you'll switch from one career to another. And it's one of the things I found with IBM. It's one of the things with the rail industry. People can go out of the industry and back in, and that actually adds value to those people in terms of their skills. And it's about recognizing those transferable skills and using that to cultivate personal ambition. And that personal ambition may be around creating a better environment for your children or for your family. It might be about the green agenda. It might be, a whole bunch of other societal things about giving back to society, as well as your own personal ambition to, own a Ferrari. And therefore, you need to start taking an industry-wide view. You can't just look at an individual company. So it's time for a new vision. And I picked that photograph because one of the things you may not notice about this guy is he's actually got dance shoes as well as a surfboard. I'm not sure he's going to dance on his surfboard. But this idea that, well, I've done a bit of work this morning, I might do a bit of dancing this afternoon, then I'm going to go surfing. And you can actually make a living out of all those things. So it's interesting to speculate, what does this guy do? Yeah, has he just been to see a bunch of VPs because he wants to make surfboards? Is he off to do some tap dancing in a marine version of some famous play? It's the fact that you've got to, when you think about people and you think about individuals, you've got to think about them differently, and you've got to think about how they fit into your organisation and what they can offer you differently. So thanks for putting him back in. I think he's quite. It's these two guys in the background here looking at him, and they're also wondering what the hell he's doing and where he's going. So how do you create a vision? So as I said, we're using rail as an example. So let's look at rail's big vision. And a lot of very smart people work together to build a vision for rail. The industrial strategy, as I said, was published last year. It's called the Rail Sector Deal. It's a deal between the government and industry that's worth about 35 billion over the next 15 years. And it sets out where rail needs to go, what it needs to do, and how industry needs to adapt to support rail. It was signed off by, it was initiated by Grayling, but I can't remember the guy who signed it off, Patrick Thingy. A good friend of mine wrote most of it, Anna Del Vecchio, and the other companies involved in this, believe it or not, was McLaren, the Formula One team. And they actually went outside of the rail industry not entirely sure why they went to McLaren, but they went outside the rail industry. So a lot of input there from other sectors. They then came up with this Moving Britain Ahead report a few years ago about connecting people, a strategic vision for rail. The interesting thing about that is this is all about moving people around. The industrial strategy for rail is all about moving trains around, and they're not necessarily the same thing. And then alongside this, National Skills Academy for Rail, which was the organisation that effectively defined the modern apprenticeship scheme, they came up with a sector plan to deliver skills into rail and where they were going to come from. The problem I had with all of these is that they're all focused on the industry. They're not focused on the people in the industry or even the people that use the services. And that's a problem. So just give some examples of some projects that I've personally been involved in. And this is really reinforcing the theme that the skills that you need within an industry, the skills that you need within a program aren't necessarily the traditional skills that you would turn to in that organization. People are rail experts, and they are experts in rail as it existed in 1880. So if you brought Isambard Kingdom Brunel back to life and you took him down to Paddington Station and showed him how the railways operate, he would say, yeah, that's exactly how they operated when I was here. And it hasn't changed. And it will never change, because 80% of people who work in rail because their family worked in rail. They don't work in rail because they've been attracted into the sector because they think that they want to influence social mobility. They're there because they knew that was what their dad did, so they're going to do it. And it's also why they're having a problem recruiting women into the rail sector. There are very few women in the rail sector. They're underrepresented. There are very few people with ethnic minorities. It's because they don't have a family history of working in rail, which is a shame, because there's a lot of skills there that we need. But if we look at some of these projects which were fundamental in changing the way rail is used by people, when we did the route optimization, we needed a bunch of sociologists to understand what people did and why they did it, why they went to work when they did. We got a whole bunch of crowdsourced data. So I actually worked with, we worked with Telefonica on that one. That was in Africa. And we worked with Telefonica, and people put an app on their phone, and we understood how they moved, where they went. A little graphic of it up there somewhere in the top left-hand corner. Predictive maintenance obviously needed intimate knowledge of rail, but we need to bring in people who understood big data and pattern recognition and AI. Those skills don't exist within the rail industry, because there's great people that understand signaling. If you want somebody to understand data transmission, Network Rail run the second largest private data network in the world. They understand that, but they don't understand pattern recognition and AI. Suicide Watch, we actually talked to Samaritans. We brought in psychologists from Cambridge University. We brought in behavioural scientists to look at people's, how do you tell if somebody is about to commit suicide or somebody is at risk of committing suicide? How do you do that through using imaging technology? Crowd monitoring, human behaviour, again, psychologists, understanding incidents developing when you get a big crowd at a railway station. Similarly with safety, incident management, we used people from the army and the police in that one. And I'll show you, we did a whole social media platform for staff, which is the next one. What people do during disruption, why some people react badly, why some people don't care. The people don't care are the ones that are quite happy with a 15 quid voucher to go to Wetherspoons. The ones that do care are the ones that are trying to get home for the birth of their first child. It's quite easy when you talk to psychologists to work out why some people are annoyed and some people are happy. And then visual surveying, we did, it was based on something we actually did in South America for surveying roads where you had the limited ability to train people. So you use image recognition and graphics design. So again, it was bringing in those skills from outside of the industry. And then we created this, what we called the social blueprint for rail. And this is all about trying to blend the whole thing about, this is my job, this is what I've got to do today. Yeah, I need information about what's going on in the rail industry. If a train's not running, why? What can I do? How do I manage continuous improvement? Collaboration, and collaboration is across industry. It's not, one train operating company can affect another. If you silo your information in that company, then you cannot exploit that information in another company. If it's Network Rail that's got the failure. So believe it or not, before we did this, if there was a Network Rail failure, only Network Rail knew about it. The staff on the station who worked for Virgin, for example, had no idea. If the problem was with cross-country and it was Northern that were affected, Northern didn't know that there was a cross-country problem. Yeah. So you had all this, and then tickets being valid on another service. Nobody had told the staff on the train. So there was a whole bunch of disconnects, which all result from the fact you fragmented the industry. Yeah. You've then got what's your role and training, your knowledge, your expertise. How do you capture knowledge you've got? How do you exploit the knowledge of other people? Policies across the whole network, making sure things are consistent. Then when you move into career, the whole professional development and the career path, they are cross-industry. They're not, as we said, within a particular company. We started to use AI to understand things like holidays, because you don't want, if you go to Leeds Station or Manchester Station, there are multiple companies running that station. Each company has its own staff and its own holidays. So you actually end up with a situation where you don't have enough staff to man the station for health and safety, because 5 companies have let their staff take holidays at the same time. So, and then the engagement. The engagement is all about, it's about the whole rail industry. What's happening in rail? What are people saying about it? What's happening in the community? They've just opened a new creche at Guiseley Station, all that kind of stuff. And an ability for people to effectively get together virtually and to connect people using AI. So that was the blueprint for rail. And that whole social collaboration, it needs to be in the digital industry. So, collaboration's within the team, but it's also industry-wide. You're cultivating knowledge and sharing it. You're promoting and maintaining the industry vision. It's social, not structured. You let individuals find their own way. You can't structure them in a silo. They need to get out of that and maybe come back into your organization. And you can also showcase that industry. If you have a wider vision, you can showcase the whole industry to a wider talent pool. And you need industry-wide training. And there's a quote there, which I'm sure you've heard before. What happens if we spend money training our people and they leave? And of course, obviously say that, well, what happens if you don't and they stay? What you want to do is you want to train them, but you want to retain them in the industry, because it's something I learned from the consumer world. If you create a better environment for the whole industry, you've created a better environment for individual organizations within it as well. So everybody prospers. That's kind of the concept we're trying to get across. We talked about the fact that we need engineers in 5 years' time. Where are those engineers now? Well, they're in school. And at the moment, those teenagers that we're trying to showcase industry to don't have any clarity on career. They're future savvy. They might want a job that has a green agenda. And they're concerned just as much about how they make a living, just not so much just how much they earn. Yeah. If you're going to find out how difficult it is to recruit teenagers into some industries, go and ask BAT. Schools have got budget pressures. They've got the Gatsby benchmarks. They're there to tick boxes. They're trying to send kids to university. Kids have got no idea why they're going to university, other than everybody has to go to university to get a good job, don't they? But they don't know what that job is. An industry, they've got the skill shortage, but they're not communicating the career opportunities to the teenagers. You tend to find that there is a STEM focus. They all have STEM ambassadors. And they say, oh, STEM subjects are great. But they still don't tell the kids why they're great and what they can do with those STEM subjects. So, part of what we need to do is try and bring all those circles together. There's 6.5 million teenagers in the UK. And we could use some of those to fill the gaps that are out there. So starting younger is the thing. The young lady on the right wanted to be a ballet dancer when she was 13. She's now a mechanical engineer working at Port Talbot Steelworks. And apart from the fact that she gets pissed off because people keep asking if she can fix their car for them, because they don't know what a mechanical engineer does, she absolutely loves her career. She had the advantage of being inspired by a school trip to Port Talbot Steelworks. She decided that's what she wanted to do, and she's, she progressed pretty rapidly. One of the companies I work with, she's one of our ambassadors. She's brilliant, getting more women into engineering. But it's that whole, increasing. So we talk about rail, increasing the talent pool in rail. This applies across the industry. And we need to get that message across to secondary school kids, and we need to get it into colleges and universities so that more people think about that industry. And just on that whole engineering thing, good Manchester boy, Brian Cox said, the reason we don't have enough engineers in the country is because nobody knows what an engineer does anymore. And if you don't tell people what jobs are out there, they don't know, they can't get into it. Talked about Terrace as one of our ambassadors. There's another lad called Tom who works at IBM in the garage, doing a lot of fantastic work in AI, and he's a graphics designer. And if you want a career in IBM right now, particularly in the digital side or AI, then having having any sort of degree in any form of computer science is a real disadvantage. They want psychologists, they want graphics designers, they want art historians, and they want those people because they want to be creative. Yeah, they want those people because they've got new ideas, they've got new ways of visualizing things. You haven't got the picture on there. I was hoping there was a picture on there. There was on my original slide a graphic that Tom had done visualizing the Working Eye career discovery platform. And we run a session with the IBM Garage Workshop, and they come up with digital solutions. I don't know if any of you guys are ever familiar with them. And what Tom did was he was able to take the output of 5 very technical people and put it into a fantastic visual in a day's workshop. You haven't got it on there, have you?
I'm gonna get it up while we're on, Simon. Just want to just explain that in a bit more detail, and then while we're doing that, I'll get it up in front of me. Bear with me.
So basically, because what Tom was able to do and is able to do is visualize concepts and draw them in a way that, a single piece of paper. Here is a concept of Working Eye. This is about how teenagers discover careers. There's over 2,000 careers out there. How do you match the attributes and ambitions of a teenager to those careers? How do you show somebody who wanted to be a ballet dancer at 13 that actually human rights lawyer when they're 17 and now they want to be a human rights lawyer? Actually, a lot of the attributes of the ballet dancer or gymnast, that teamwork, the ability to work within a framework, all of those things, they are very necessary for a human rights lawyer. So what he was able to do was put that concept down on a piece of paper as an image that showed how teenagers understood their ambitions, their desires, and how that matched to different careers, but grouping the careers in a way that made sense from the point of view of competencies and skills and ambition, rather than a siloed structure, which is probably what you would have come up with if you had somebody who'd come up through the traditional route in IBM. And that's why they're recruiting psychologists, and that's why they're developing some of the Watson technologies. And talking of AI, because it was something that amused Sam while he's finding the diagram, we've been using chatbots for careers and for helping people develop for a while now. And one of the first ones was, have you got it?
There's that diagram.
Yeah, there you go, Sam's diagram, which is brilliant because you probably can't see it too well on there, but if you go through it, it's absolutely everything that was captured in the day is in there. And I think we all appreciate that trying to get a picture on a page of a very complex topic and pick out some of the key points is a really key skill. And he's got that skill because he's a graphics designer. But the chatbots, and this Positive Transition is an organisation I'm also involved with who help veterans into civilian life, and there's a rich vein of talent within the veteran community which we're not exploiting in UK PLC, and we're trying to bring those together through Johnny Mercer, who's the Minister for Veterans Affairs. And in America, the US Army decided they needed to cast their net wider. They were having problem recruiting teenagers into the army. Can't think why. So they decided they needed more than the recruitment guys down at the Winn-Dixie talking to disenfranchised teenagers turning up. And they put out a chatbot because they thought teenagers live on the net now, so we'll put a chatbot out. And they based it on a guy called Sergeant Starr, who'd had about 30 years experience recruiting kids into the army. And they trained it up with all the questions that Sergeant Starr told them that they would be asked and all the answers that he'd given for his 30 years. And they ran it for a month as a pilot, and they went back to Sergeant Starr and they said, "Look, we've got these 3 questions that you didn't give us the answers to. And they're the top 3 questions that kids coming into the army ask." And Sergeant Starr, with his 30 years experience, sat there and said, "That's no problem, I can help you with that. What are the 3 questions?" And they said, "Well, the first question is, will I get laid?" And Sergeant Starr said, "I have never been asked that in 35 years of recruiting people into the army." And they said, "Okay, well, we'll come up and answer that." He says, "What's the second question?" He said, "Will I have to shower with other men?" And he said, "That is another question which I have never been asked in my 35 years of working in the army and recruiting teenagers." He goes, "What's the third question?" And he said, "The third question is, what kind of gun will I get?" And he goes, "Well, that's an easy answer, but nobody's ever asked me that question." And it was that whole thing about, if you actually give kids the opportunity to ask questions without them sitting in front of a guy in uniform and a preconception of, you don't ask Sergeant Starr, "Will I get laid if I join the army?" But a chatbot, they'd ask. And we found out more about why kids would join the army. But it was, as Sam said, he wanted to do so. We could have gone through. I could have done something about digital and social media, but everybody does those. I thought this whole shift that we need to make towards thinking about the world of work differently, the whole concept of promoting industries, not qualifications, not straitjackets of careers, is something that's going to be more and more important to us in the future. And I'm sure most of us have got kids, and it's going to be even more important for them. As I said, the two of the organisations I'm involved in, because I've been doing a lot of work around this, it's not my core, not necessarily my core day job, is Working. I am a director of the company. They are delivering careers advice to 13-year-old and upwards. 13-year-old and upwards because they can sign a GDPR at 13. And we don't want their parents, you don't want their parents influencing what they do, otherwise they end up working in the railway. And positive transition, which is all about, as I said, the veterans. And I got involved in that purely because it's, I feel it's a way of giving back to those who've served the country. And there are 30,000 people leave the army every year. And being in the armed forces is one of the biggest causes of homelessness and suicide in the UK, which is why, the positive in positive transition, to try and help those people into some of these holes in industry, where currently we're missing out on what's probably one of the best trained leadership skill pools in the world. So that's it. Any questions?
Simon, really, really thank you for that. And you're right, it's given us a real different format to some of the other roundtables where we've really focused heavily on tech transformation, digital transformation. And this has been interesting because we've seen this skills gap for such a long time anyway. I know you were focusing on the rail industry, but everything that you've talked about can be transferred into any industry at all, can't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, as I said, it's, I think you and I had a discussion earlier about the airlines, because that's another sector in the transport industry I do a lot of work with. And right now we're laying off pilots left, right and centre. But if you actually talk to O'Leary, he'll tell you that the biggest threat to Ryanair in the next 5 years is the lack of trained pilots. So whilst we're laying off pilots, they're all in their 50s and they're taking early retirement. We're not training new pilots. So, if the average age of a pilot is 52, it doesn't take much to work out. None of those that are laid off are going to come back because they're gardening now, and they're not going back to flying jets. You've also got the fleets changing, and they're not going to go through type approval. So across Europe, we're going to need 30,000 pilots in 5 years' time. And again, where are those pilots today? where's the next 21-year-old EasyJet captain? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a friend of mine who's given up flying to go and set up his own window fitting business. I mean, it's, yeah, and he's only like, late 30s, early 40s. Simon, what would you, to a digital tech business right now, or any business in UK PLC, everyone's got a lot on their plate right now, and probably retaining staff might not be high on their agenda, but I think it will be in the next 6 months, because we'll see a return. And as you said earlier, we've still got a skill shortage. What would be one takeaway that you would sort of say to a CEO right now if they wanted to make sure they're future-proofing their teams? Yeah.
Yeah, to a CEO now, I would say make sure your CDO is focused on the social aspects of digital. Make sure that you're showcasing your company and your industry so that people know it's there. They know what you do. They know what you're about. Because when the time does come that you want to start, you need to recruit and you want to get the best talent that's out there, that talent, you're only going to reach that talent if they know about you. And the way that you're going to innovate in the future is by getting those people that have a passion for what you do. You go back to Brian Cox's quote, if you don't know what an engineer does, how the hell are you going to attract more engineers? And that, go back to rail, 10,000 engineers we need in HS2. Where are they coming from? Nobody wants to be an engineer. So I would say that it's, we all know digital isn't just about technology. We'll say all the time, it's not about technology, it's about business. And I think the social media aspect of digital is something that I think CEOs need to focus on.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just put that out there to anybody else that'd like to ask a question. If you just unmute yourself and feel free to ask Simon any questions. I know he's covered quite a lot there, but anybody like to ask a question? Nobody? Surely not. Tracy?
Well, from working eye, Simon, what are the timescales? Tell us a little bit more, because the careers you've gone into in detail, you've discussed all of those gaps. What are those timescales for you to start to work actively at fixing this?
So we are planning to have a platform have a full platform in a number of foundation schools in the next academic year. We, like everybody else, got a little bit hit by COVID-19 because our major sponsor, who was also the sponsor for a new Formula One team, had more issues in Formula One than they did in careers. So we had to do a little bit of a reset. But that platform's going into schools starting in September this year. Part of that is we've had to make a few adjustments for COVID-19 so that we can showcase work, because kids can't go out and get work experience. So it's quite an important sort of adjustment to direction for the first year to make sure that, kids can get work experience in as interactive a way as possible by seeing people like them doing jobs like Keris. And I think you've seen the film of Keris doing her job at Port Talbot Steelworks.
Simon, when you look at the technical or the digital transformation, the IT tech industry, what key skill do you think is something that, if you were talking to someone now who's in school, teenager, what would you suggest then? You talked about STEM technologies or STEM subjects not being as important. What would be the next thing? What would be the subject really that a lot of people should be looking at?
I'd actually say, I didn't mean to say that STEM subjects weren't important. What I was trying to say is that the focus on STEM subjects per se is not helpful. The focus needs to be on the ambition and career desires of people. So rather than say, these are the qualifications you should go out and get because you're good at these qualifications, you need to be able to understand what it is that they aspire to do. And for most jobs that they do, there is a certain level of qualification that they will need as an empirical, I've passed this exam, I've got such and such a grade. But actually, there's a whole bunch of competencies that they would have, like, empathy, team building skills, team leadership skills, those kind of things, which they may need in the job that they're going for, and they may need to cultivate outside of school. So you go back to the example of a pilot. If you know you want to be a pilot, there are very minimal qualifications you need to be a pilot, as it happens. The one thing you do need is a pilot's license. So if you're 13 and you want to be a pilot, the best thing you can do is join the Air Training Corps, not to go and study STEM subjects at school. And actually, there's I don't know what your musical tastes are, the people on the call, but I don't know how many of you have heard of a guy called Bruce Dickinson.
Yeah.
You probably know him better as the lead singer of Iron Maiden. And he once said to me, if only I'd have known I could have been an airline pilot, I would never have become a millionaire rock star. Because his ambition at school was to be a pilot, and his careers officer at school said, "You're never going to be a pilot, Bruce. I'd give up on that ambition." So he said, "All right, I'll be a millionaire rock star." And they said, "Yeah, you'll be much better at that." Turns out he could have been a pilot, and actually is a pilot now, and he flies for EasyJet. So that's kind of like, maybe some of the pilots are going to become millionaire rock stars next. But I think it's not focusing on the subjects, it's focusing on the vision, it's focusing on the future, it's focusing on what do I want to do in my life, because I'm going to spend 50 years working. Even if I go to university, I'm probably going to spend 48 years working. That's a long time. Yeah. I've spent most of that time working, and it's a long time. And I think that's that when the focus needs to be, and then you need to map that back and say, okay, what do I need to learn now? Because I've got, I'm 13, I've got 7-8 years before I need to start looking at getting into industry and getting a career going. That's a long time if I know at the beginning of that journey what skills that I need to acquire during that period of time. I mean, we haven't gone into some of the other things that we're doing with Working Eye, which is helping them with social media, helping them, don't just retweet something, try and understand where it came from and what it's saying, because those things are going to affect your future because that's out there. So I think that's more important. Yes, academic subjects are important, but knowing what you want to do in the future, as somebody once said to me, is important to.
Okay, Lionel, I think you might have a question for us, maybe.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's the right crowd. So, I mean, everything you've said, it's pretty much spot on in my personal experience. I think I'm still reasonably young. I'm only 35, so I've been working for only 10 years. And I can see all the problems that you've touched upon in big companies. And with COVID, it's like, honestly, it feels like we've gone back. And I was wondering if this is just my feeling or if you've seen it in the industry in general as well. Because it feels like COVID hits, back to spreadsheets, back to headcounts, back to budget, forget about forward planning and thinking outside the box and transferable skills. Altogether.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And it's a bit of a dilemma at the moment. What you've got is big corporates, and this is part of the problem that we had with rail. So we went to the rail sector and we said, if you're going to solve this problem, you need to start thinking longer term. And they said, well, we don't even know if we're going to be running the franchise or have the contract in 5 years' time. So I'm not going to invest in something that's going to take 5 years. Believe it or not, one of the most forward-looking companies I've ever worked with is Ryanair. They have a 5 and 10 year planning horizon. I've never come across a company that does that before. But you're absolutely right. Most industry is focused on the shareholders and the next quarters. What's the share price doing today? And that is the CEO's only, in most of the companies we're talking about here, publicly listed companies, the share price is the only thing that they're interested in. They're not interested in anything else. And if they can't influence the share price, and right now, the whole transferable skills, retaining skills, everything else, that isn't going to impact the spread. That's not going to impact the bottom line. The bottom line is, am I going to be in business in 9 months' time for a CEO? A good example of that was Network Rail. They had their STEM ambassador had a budget to do a project, and that budget was taken away because she could not prove that it had any impact on COVID-19. And every single project right now today in Network Rail is focused on does this project impact COVID-19? So any business disruption, anything that's happening due to COVID-19, you have to align your project to, or your budget gets taken away and your headcount gets taken away. And you're absolutely right. It's a problem. I don't know how you square that one. I really don't. I know that some companies, they are realizing there is a future and they need to climb out of the hole. But I honestly would say they're in the minority. And that's a big problem.
Yeah. So you just confirm my suspicions.
I'm afraid that's one of the ones I don't have an answer to. There are some forward-looking companies out. What's interesting is that the number of startups which are getting funding right now in a lot of areas is quite interesting. The number of grants the government have put out there are quite interesting. And if you look on Innovate UK and you look on the other government grant sort of websites, a lot of them they've got to have a COVID-19, they've got to have a COVID-19 thing. Recently, they've started to look at R&D and innovation that is beyond COVID-19. Now, whether that means that companies will start looking at that horizon, or whether government are trying to put that out there to try and force companies to look beyond that horizon, I don't know. But it is a problem, yes, you're absolutely right.
Thanks, Lionel. Really good question, that, and I think you're absolutely right. There is, lots of companies in panic mode at the moment. Dion, I see you're on the call. How are you doing? You all right?
Hi there. Sorry, Sam. I was a bit late for about 25 minutes, so I've missed the beginning. So apologies.
No,
I did join, and it all seems very interesting.
That's quite all right.
Very
Thank
good
you.
Information. Can I just touch upon the last comment about the market and stuff, because I got hold of some data just to give everyone kind of an understanding of the impact to the labor market for the UK. So there was a consistent, up to March, there was a consistent 1 million jobs out there, right, at any given time, ballparking it. It dropped to 600 and then dropped to 360 at its lowest, June, right? So April, May, June, it kind of hit rock bottom. So echoing all the comments have been, at the moment, we're at the very bottom. Interestingly, from June to July, the trajectory is going to go from 370 to 450. Okay, right? So we're 2/3 away from what the normal market is, which is at any given point, 1 million jobs out there, right? And which implies that the 2/3 that were lost, most of them were change jobs, change capability, forward-looking, transformation, to the majority, which means that the jobs that are going there, they're all very much related about cash flow, liquidity, share value, COVID, everything that has to do that. If you're in the, let's say, Azure cloud space, all about expanding that. But just to give you an idea, we're 2/3 of the demand away from a normal month at this country. And you can multiply this across all countries, right? They're the same. The good thing is that it's growing, right? We've gone from 360 from May to June, went 375, and now it looks like we're going to 450. So my 2 pence to this conversation is that it's going up, right? The trajectory, but it's still a trajectory. We're not even there. And I would assume that we're going to be to some kind of peak Q4 towards the end of it. What we see as what companies want to do 2021, 2022, because I think at the moment they're all planning. They're all planning around how do they, somebody made a comment, I think, Simon, you said the next 9 months, right? Am I going to be viable? Am I going to survive? Yeah. And I think what we're seeing now is this planning that's happening, trickle of, okay, we need to do some stuff. Business problems don't go away, but we're not there yet. And it probably needs a few months to go to some kind of COVID world peak before we're all hoping 2021, like really, things to kind of move up, right? That kind of V thing. So the V thing seems to be materializing, but it's still at the bottom of that up.
Yeah.
Interesting that you say that, and I think that, so I know it's wandering slightly off topic, but the government are trying to influence that marketplace, and I'm just actually looking while I'm talking. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody from the Knowledge Transfer Network who specialises in rail, and looking at the rail funding and engagement opportunities. And she sent me a list, and I'm looking at this list compared to the list as it existed 2 months ago. And the top one is still the Open CV19 Fund, proposals for short-term projects addressing and mitigating health, social, economic, etc., which is about 350 million fund. When you start looking down, they're now HS2. So as you probably know from the news, the government kicked off HS2. I mean, they just said, stop buggering about. We need this project. It's a huge national infrastructure project. And we need to get it off the ground because it would create a lot of blah. But then look down the other ones. They're all about business development. There's Dragon's Dens, digital asset opportunities, design contests. They're all suddenly starting to be government-funded initiatives which are not COVID-19. So whereas 6 weeks ago they were all COVID-19, there was you couldn't get a grant if it didn't. COVID-19 was almost, it was etched in there. You know, you must say why your market's been disrupted by COVID-19. You must be able to do this under COVID-19. You must explain how you're going to mitigate against COVID-19. And that was everything the government put out. Now, it's about 80% is complete innovation and long-term projects. So I don't know whether you'll see, I don't know how much influence government have, because that's replicated across industry. I don't know whether you know, your thoughts on how much influence that has.
Well, I guess for me, the influence the government has is that it's pumping a lot of money to every company that's out there. Literally, every company that's out there has borrowed money, right? So liquidity, the government's supporting liquidity in order for the businesses to change, because they all have cash flow problems, right? At one or greater extent. So, and also you have a lot of PE kind of private equity activity that's kind of stopped, literally stopped. The only big one that you could see in the market, you could hear, was the KKR that was announced a few weeks ago. And that was the first one since like January, right? Which they started the process. So for me, you have a glut of money coming into the businesses from the government. Regardless if you're a successful business or not, you just took the money, right? So you have assets, you have money, you have liquidity. Now, there's the point of, were you restructuring before? Do you need to change? Those problems don't go away, so that needs to happen. And then you have all these private equities that have done nothing for the last few months because of where we're at, waiting to take over, to acquire, you know, remerge, structure, everything. So for me, there's this crescendo that's coming together, that lots of cash, lots of cash companies via the government to keep things, subsidized roles that have to come to an end, which is, I think, in a couple of months. So the companies have cash, but they need to align to other business operating models. Is the demand from the consumer still the same? And that's going to be a huge change at the moment because the consumer is changing. Plus a lot of PEs waiting it out, creating a bottleneck for all the acquisitions that need to happen. So you have a crescendo that could be really positive if the companies have understood what the consumers demand, because the consumers are hit hard, me, you, and everyone else, right? We're all protecting cash flow at the moment. So, but digitization, the way I say it, is going to be off the roof because you've enabled me to work from home, shop from home, and not really impact my day-to-day life. So that is what the companies, I think, are looking in. Are they still relevant with their consumer? Do they still need to manage? What's the demand? And there's a glut of money, and there's a huge bottleneck on takeover. So you could be seeing a really positive scenario coming up for 2021. Nevertheless, within a COVID within a COVID ecosystem, right? COVID is not going to go away for 2 years at least. Even with the vaccines, whenever they find them, 5-7 billion people to be vaccinated, it'll take forever, right? It will take. So you see this scenario coming in, governments pumping money, private equities probably starting acquisitions again, but there's a huge bottleneck, and companies need to restructure because their consumer has changed.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that's all change, right?
Yeah, and I think a couple of points you made, just to before somebody else responds. I think you're right, and you mentioned private equity. Private equity is absolutely awash with cash right now. So, you know, as the stock markets went down, they took their cash out of the stock market, and it's now sitting in the bank. Well, it doesn't do private.
Yes.
You know, no private equity firm wants it in the bank. That's the first thing. The other thing is, I look at COVID-19, and yes, it's much bigger. But if you think of the industries that I was working at the time, you think of 9/11 and the disruption that caused. And everybody said, you know, oh, nobody's going to go on holiday to America anymore from Europe. Nobody's going to fly. Nobody's going to travel through an airport. Nobody's going to want to go through a big railway station. Nobody's going to go and work in the city. Another one we had was the Olympics in London, when the big scare stories about how expensive it was going to be in London and how terrible it was going to be, and it never manifested itself. But everybody permanently changed some of their behaviours, as they did after 9/11. But the majority of people either went back to the way they were before, or in a slightly modified way. But one thing that every company did was they then had a contingency plan. And there wasn't a contingency plan before COVID-19. There wasn't a contingency plan before 9/11. You know, and you go back over these things over the. There was no contingency plan for Y2K. Everybody says Y2K was a big, you know, it was something that we actually saw coming, and every company mitigated against it. But I guarantee every single company that I know, somewhere in their policies is something that was written for Y2K. Yeah, whether that's, you know, interruption of power, loss of labour, anything else. And some of those companies have already told me that some of the policies they enacted during COVID-19 were based on policies they wrote in Y2K. And for the transport sector, some of them are policies they wrote under. So I think there's an opportunity there as we bounce back for companies to, you know, take advantage of one of the rail companies I work with. They've already said they're not going to have anybody in the office until January at least. And they're actually considering the need to bring people into the office because they're changing. I think more people will work from home. IBM said the same thing to me. You know, we're going to have more people working from home. At the moment, we can't hot desk because I didn't realise this. Hot desking is illegal, apparently. So, you know, all of IBM's facilities are hot desking, so they can't use them. They can't go into South Bank because it's hot desking. So I think that there will be a lot of changes that come about from this. And it's interesting what you say about the amount of cash. And it's where that successful companies will be the one that direct that cash into those things that make them more robust for the future. Because there'll be another COVID-19. It might not be a pandemic. It might not be a terrorist attack, but it might not be Y2K, but it'll be something else will come along. That's what I think history's taught us that. This is slightly bigger and affected a lot more people, for sure.
It is. It's perhaps what we, you know, need to be living in as. And for me, it's kind of the opportunities that presents, right? All the data is driving that companies will move away from, you know, protect to kind of, if I come out on the other side, is my consumer going to be still the same? So, and again, speaking like yourself, speaking to some of the big agencies, the big consultancies, they're all doing proposals at the moment, or companies are going back to their boards now. And this is kind of the transitionary period that we're at. I believe it hasn't settled yet. Hence, I'm looking more Q4 for things to settle and for companies to get out of the races and with some change work because they know their business, right? So that's kind of my 2 pence.
Yeah, and I think that you talk about career opportunities under COVID-19. I've taken on 2 new non-exec directorships specifically because those companies wanted somebody to advise the board, you know, on contingency planning, on digital, you know, how they could leverage AI. how they can actually work in a different way. And they're both companies that are completely diverse, totally different, in completely different sectors. And I think that those opportunities out there exist. I mean, it's slightly different with the non-exec roles, because the laws changed and every company has to take on more non-exec directors now. So there's a lot of people out there looking for non-exec directors that can actually make a difference, but they've also been told that they've got to take them on.
For sure.
The only problem is that most of them are pro bono, so they're not much use to anybody.
And Dion, thanks for that. Really appreciate it. It's interesting to get your take on that. I know you've got a very sort of quite a strong consultancy background, and you're working currently in facilities management for Mighty. So there's a lot going on in your world right now, isn't it?
Indeed. And Mighty are going through the same challenges. I mean, think about it. Heathrow, Gatwick, they're prime customers, right? Airlines, and they were going nowhere. So it's, but they're a strategic partner to the government, which is kind of in a wonderful place to be. But Mighty, like everyone else, still has, it's the model. They're looking at the model, right? They're being very tactical at the moment, but they're looking at the model, because you can only be strategic partner if you have a horizon, right? And you understand and you partner with the big infrastructure projects, the big infrastructure companies, what this country needs as assets to be going. So it's a changing world. And from an investor point of view, everyone wants to understand, first of all, are you going to survive? Second of all, what's our cash flow? Third, how do we get out of this? What potential will be for 2 years? So I'm in a good position trying getting that information. Happy to share, but it's we're definitely hit the bottom of the barrel, and we're kind of slightly coming up.
Yeah. The
thermostat just slightly turning, but it was a handbrake.
Yeah, we're starting to see those shoots of recovery, and we're starting to have conversations with private sector businesses about what their plans are and what they're looking to do over the next 3 to 6 months. And we're also seeing, we're actually on a lot of the frameworks for government and public sector, and we're starting to see more and more opportunities getting released for tender on either digital data or cloud strategies and projects. So, that is a good sign. And some of them, as you say, have a COVID slant on them. An example of that is the current discovery piece that we're doing at the moment for Welsh Government, which is all around track and trace of social care workers, and bringing that into, bringing a huge digital change into that organisation for Welsh Government. So yeah, there are signs that things are going to turn around. Lionel, I think you were saying you've got one last question, and then we'll wrap up. So what was your question for Simon?
It's not necessarily just for Simon, but okay. Let's imagine everything goes well and company starts picking up again. There'll be a lot of recruitments happening. So my question was, to a recruiting manager, what would be your top tips or considerations when looking at CVs and recruiting for a new position? And equally, would you have any tips for a manager who's a key member of staff is about to leave for another company? So 2 different scenarios there.
I'll handle that one straight away, and then I'll pass it over to Simon as well. But I've got an opinion on that. So a lot of organisations talk about their employer brand and making sure that they've got a strong employer brand, and it actually goes back to a few of the things that Simon was talking about sharing company goals and buying into the vision of the business. Sometimes if it's a board of directors and it's a corporate culture, there is a corporate culture around that, but essentially it's around what are the objectives of the business. And it goes beyond, what the actual company does. It's a why. Why are we here? And if it's a small business, usually it's around the CEO or the leader of the business and their vision, and it's getting people bought into that and having a tribe or a culture around it. And if you've got a good, strong culture, a good, strong employer brand, which is not just around pounds and pence and generating revenue, it's about what's that company doing for the greater good? What do they bring value to? And if you've got that right, then first of all, you know, attracting people to that employer brand, people will want to come and work for you. And people generally probably won't want to leave your business, hopefully. But actually, it's quite interesting. Before the call, Lionel, Simon and I had a conversation about 8 o'clock this morning, and we were talking about what companies do differently to attract people. And actually, it's not about saying, come and work for us and stay with us forever. Actually, it's okay to let people go. And it's okay to let people go on sabbaticals. And actually, if you plan for that in advance, you get people's buy-in, because everyone's motivated by different things. So I'll bring Simon in on that. And you've got a great example of that, haven't you, Simon?
Yeah. I think when you're talking about was Anglian Water, who I think when we started the project, the average length of time that people worked at Anglian Water was something around 20 odd years, and they were trying to recruit graduates because there's a lot of digital projects going on. There's a lot of projects about, you know, cleaning up the water paucity in that part of the world. So they're planning on doubling the population, but they've got no more natural water resources, so saving water. A whole bunch of really interesting projects, and they were recruiting graduates. They have a tie-up with Cambridge University, for example. So pretty smart people. And they discovered that they're only staying for 18 months. So whilst you got, you know, the average person was there like 22 years, they were bringing in graduates and they were staying a maximum of 18 months. And they didn't understand why. And they went to them and they said, graduates basically said, well, you know, when I came here, I thought I was going to make a difference to the environment. That's what you told me, but I'm not doing that. And the job fulfillment that the graduates were getting wasn't there. So they went away and did a bit of brainstorming. We actually, I facilitated a board away day, and they came up with a whole bunch of different things about them. They came up with some value statements. But the one that really stuck was they said, okay, if you work for us for, I can't remember, 4 years, 5 years, every 4 or 5 years, you can go and work for WaterAid for 9 months in a place of your choice, and we'll pay for it. So you want to go to India and help with water poverty, you want to go to Africa and dig wells, and, you know, you want to go and work on water treatment plants in sub-Saharan Africa, whatever it is, we'll pay for that. And they had graduates queuing up to join. And it wasn't because of the job they were doing at Anglian Water, it was because they thought they could make a difference to the environment, and that's why they wanted to go work for the company. Because if you look at Anglian Water on the web, they will push themselves as an environmental company. So their message was, we're an environmental company, we're helping the environment. The reality of the graduates when they went to work there was, no, you're not. You're just trying to return. You're just trying to, you know, in this particular accounting period, you're trying to make a return for the investors. We're not into that. We're off. And they went somewhere else. And mostly didn't even work in the water industry. But what they actually found, or they're finding now, is that they've got highly motivated staff who go away, meet other people when they're working on WaterAid projects. They come back with new ideas. And they come back completely refreshed and infused. And it's a lot cheaper to send somebody off, and you'll know this, Sam, because you know your fees. It's a lot cheaper to send somebody off for a few months to work on WaterAid, which is entirely, you can discount the entire cost of that against corporation tax. And in fact, I think that there are actually some grants available from government for WaterAid as well, through the Foreign Office. So, you know, if you think it costs them $5,000 to let that graduate go abroad for 9 months, the net cost, it's a lot cheaper than recruiting another graduate. So it's that vision. It's also understanding what it is that somebody wants to get out of the workplace. Yeah. I mean, when I went to work for IBM, I had a vision about what IBM was, which was probably based on what I thought IBM was in 1979. And it was a very different place, and it was a very refreshing experience, a very positive experience. I'm not sure now I'd want to go back to that corporate environment, but they're a fantastic employer. They're really, you know, but you don't see the IBM that the IBM are today outside of IBM. So trying to recruit people like Sam, the graphics designer who did the graphic that's on the screen, they still struggle because they can't get that message out there. So what I would say is exactly what Sam said, basically, is you've got to create a good positive image of your industry and your company. I actually did a project a year ago trying to do that for BAT, and I have to say we completely failed. We couldn't make BAT attractive to anybody.
Yeah, I think you're struggling with that one, Simon.
Struggling with that one, yeah. Just kind of like, yeah, making beagles smoke is most people's impression of BAT.
But then BAT are going through a lot of change at the moment, I believe.
Yeah.
One of the ladies who was on one of our calls last week, she actually, I think, was potentially approached there for a project role with them, where they're actually looking to change and move into not vaping, but helping support people to cut out smoking, but move into the vaping market. And again, it's whether you call it spin or changing their business model slightly, they realise they've got to change and evolve if they're going to survive. Taking your point earlier, Lionel, about what would a recruiting manager, what should they be doing when they're looking at CVs? I think they should be going beyond the CV, really, in my opinion. And I think that organisations need to have a more blended approach and a more inclusive approach to how they select people, and don't just look at a CV. A lot of people talk about blind hiring. So actually, to make sure that you're not falling down falling into the trap of unconscious bias, you should just look at a CV. Don't look at who they are and just look at their skills. But there's things like now there's SPQ tests, there's psychometric profiling, proper technical testing. You can do video interviewing, you can do tests with people. But you know what? I just think that organisations need to be far more open-minded to the type of individual that they want to recruit. And they need to be really diverse. They need to be thinking outside the box about their selection process. The type of person they look for doesn't necessarily, as Simon says, come from a STEM background. And if you're going to have a diverse, we see the stats that organisations that are truly diverse have actually a better productivity, a better balance sheet, and are more likely to succeed financially. And we're a long way off that. We really are. And right now we're hearing stories of companies putting an advert out on LinkedIn and getting 300, 400 applicants. And having to go through that process of selecting the right person is really hard. And they're not going to get it right every time. And we've just got to kind of, at the moment, roll with that and hope that through education, through constant, innovation, we can maybe use tech to help them, speed up that process and speed up that selection process. But I think for individuals, doing things like this is really good. Setting yourself aside from, people used to say, if you're a graduate, go and sort of go and travel the world and then add that to your CV, talk about that. But I think these days that set of skills is going to change. So if you're going to do something as a side hustle or a different job, the gig economy, include that. Try and do as many things as you can, experience as many things as you can to come out of university as a well-rounded individual who can kind of excel in a number of different areas. And that's why, psychology, I believe, is 10 years ago was probably not even in the top 10 of subjects. And now it's going to be, in the next few years, it's going to be top 3, top 4 things that you need to know or to excel in if you're going to go into any job.
I think that you're right. And that's part of where we're coming from with the working eye concept, is trying to get kids to understand that, their competencies are as important as their academic skills. Yeah. Their life experiences are just as important. And I'd like, and I think companies are only just starting to embrace that. And I spent a lot of time working in Germany. And if you go to, and the US is very much like us, very rigid. We've got a structured approach. The Germans, believe it or not, don't. And you go and work in a German company, much more diverse range of people in the workforce that you meet, completely different backgrounds. And when I worked with IBM in Germany with Lufthansa, the team out there, the diversity of the backgrounds in that team was absolutely phenomenal. And it was a lot easier to work with those guys out there because of that whole, that diversity within the people that were there. But just as the companies over here, I got bored with this industry, so I went to work in the figure skating industry for a while, just because it was very different, like you do. And I was technical chair of the Professional Skaters Association in Rochester, Minnesota. And I joined EDS, and EDS were a very open company. They were a great organisation, in fact, one of the best employers I've ever worked for. And then it got taken over by HP. I called into the office one day. This guy says, technical chair of the Professional Skaters Association. I said, yeah. He says, you've got to give that up. It's an official position. I said, well, why have I got to give it up? Well, they might be competitive with HP. It's not like, no, they kind of like govern figure skating globally. How is that? They're not suddenly going to go into being a services company. And it was that narrow-mindedness that HP had, which I think came in after the Compaq acquisition, that the culture changed. And it became a very different place to work. And Tracy used to work there as well. And she'll, in fact, I was Tracy's manager at HP, I seem to remember. And HP became a very different place to work because it suddenly became a very narrow focus. And we all know what happened to them. Tracy will now say I was brilliant.
Nudge, nudge, Tracy.
But I don't think your experience of HP was, they were very rigid. They were very cookie cutter. And if you didn't fit the cookie, you didn't fit the mold, you weren't going to go very far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which was very different to EBS and IBM, to be fair. I can say that because they don't exist anymore. So,
just to sort of wrap it up now, and on the subject of diversity, in a few weeks we've got a chap called Damien Joseph Bridgman who's going to be joining us, and he's going to be talking about diversity and inclusion. Damien's actually got cerebral palsy. He's a government advisor to social care and Welsh Government. And it's going to be an interesting one talking about diversity and inclusion from his point of view as well, some of the challenges he's faced. But thank you for today. Thank you very much, Simon. Really appreciate your time. And we will be here again next week. I'll have an update of next week's topic. I think we're on back to a bit of data analytics and personalization using AI in e-commerce, and that's going to be with one of my John Carney, who I've known for quite a while. So please join us next week for that one. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And if anybody's got any questions or anything they'd like to follow up on, please do that on the group in LinkedIn. You'll get an email this week with a follow-up to today's recording, with links to all of the slides and the recording and details of next week's roundtable. But thank you very much indeed, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, guys.
Again, guys. Thanks.